Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about a book I read recently, Nature Nonfiction. This is, here we go, Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Tallamy. And I was already familiar with Tallamy's work professionally because he is a quite prominent sort of like plant insect interaction ecologist and plant ecologist a lot too, I guess. And he's local to the Mid-Atlantic, which is where I've done most of my education. So I'd read some of his research papers and research papers that came out of his lab, but then this book was actually recommended to me by a couple of non-scientists. In particular, one is an artist, like a mural artist, as just like a really good, inspiring read about doing conservation locally. And that's actually the I want to say subtitle, but I know that's not the correct word for books, but you know what I mean. Anyway, it's a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. And so the whole premise of this book is Doug Tallamy starts with some of the doom and gloom about climate change and all the negative impacts that expanding urbanization and other human impacts have had on nature. But his whole book is very hopeful because he is very convinced and is advocating for the changes that people can make even just in their small backyards. And his argument throughout this book is that no matter how small your yard is, you can still have an impact. And he even has a lot of really cool examples in here of people who live in extremely highly urbanized spaces like downtown New York City and downtown Chicago, and have just like little postage stamp yard space available, even yard space where there's no existing soil and it's all paved over. And he has really inspiring examples about what those people have been able to do to sort of green up their backyard and provide even a tiny bit of natural habitat. So it's a very hopeful book about what we can do, even just as individuals at very small scales, to try to do conservation of the natural world and contribute in that way. And I just thought this book was absolutely great. I mean, it was a very quick read. It was a book that I read basically in like a day, and probably that was, some of my familiarity with the material. But it's also just incredibly readable, and there are a lot of photos in this book, which definitely helps. And it all just, as I said, readable, and it just makes sense. This book would be especially applicable for people who live in the Mid-Atlantic area of the US because he uses a lot of very specific examples from this region, both from his professional work locally, but also from his own experience as someone who has really tried to do conservation on his own residential backyard. And so you could basically use it as an instructional manual if you live in that area. He tells you like what plants are really great, as sort of examples using his experience. So one example of that is one of the points that he makes is that it's not just about conserving plants, which is what we think about when we think about gardening in our backyard. It's not just about the native plants and supporting the native plants. It's also what is the ecological benefit that those plants provide to other organisms. And the example that he goes into in quite a bit of depth is what specific types of insects rely on many of our native plant species, in particular caterpillars. So how many different species of caterpillars call an oak tree in Pennsylvania, where I live, call an oak tree home? And then he goes into some back of the envelope calculations, based on some real research about the number of caterpillars that it takes for a baby bird to grow from a recently hatched state all the way to a fledged state where the baby bird is able to leave the nest. So basically, how many caterpillars do the parents have to provide to a single baby bird? And it's in the thousands. And of course, it varies by species, and he goes into that different bird species take different lengths of time to develop, and there's a lot of evolutionary trade-offs behind that. But it just really sort of drives it home that by planting these native species, you're not just like supporting oaks by planting oaks, but you're supporting a couple hundred species of native caterpillars that then can grow in abundance and provide the thousands of caterpillars that even just one baby bird or a whole nest of little baby birds requires. So just really powerful writing, really simple. As I said, if you're in this region, you could use it as an instructional manual. And if you're not in this region, then you've got the basic idea. So you can say, okay, I'm in Southern California. What are the plants that support the most caterpillar diversity or the most caterpillar abundance in my region so that I can go plant those plants to support my caterpillars and my native bird population. So, yes, just very accessible to any audience, and very clear writing with a hopeful message. The one thing that drove me a little bit crazy about this book, was most of the book is, he has different chapters focused on different ways to do conservation in your backyard. And then at the end of the book, he has a Q&A session, where he presents some of the most commonly asked questions that he's gotten as he goes about and does outreach and talks about the popular science books that he's written, because he's written several. And it's only in that Q&A session that he finally mentions that indigenous people lived in North America for thousands of years before European colonizers came, and that, hey, maybe those indigenous people have a lot of useful knowledge when we're thinking about doing small-scale conservation conservation at any level, but especially in the context of this book. What are those local relationships and associations among the organisms that live in our backyards? And I had noticed the lack of that as I was reading the early chapters of this book. It's not that I expect him to be an expert, um, or to be able to talk about it in any particular way, because not everybody can be, and especially, he's towards the end of his career, and so it's not something that he can necessarily go out and really build up as part of his career now. But to not even mention it in the early chapters of like sort of setting the stage and setting the parameters of his own book, seemed like a pretty gross oversight to me, given where we are, uh, in my field of ecology, which is his field, given the way conversations have gone in my field lately, but also just given where we are as a society, that felt like an oversight to me. I'm glad that he did finally bring it up in the Q&A part, but it really should have been part of him setting the framework and setting the expectations for his book, or in those early chapters. So that's the only negative thing I have to say about it. Let me know if you've read this book, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.